Welcome to the Writer's Journey podcast. I'm Michael Laran, a science fiction and fantasy author on a journey to go from nobody to bestseller, and I'm documenting every step of the way. Tune in every week as I pull back the curtain on my writing life and how I'm building a writing career while working a full-time job, raising a family, and attending law school classes in the evenings. You can find show notes for this week's episode, a free starter library of my fiction, and much more at michaellaran.com.
Hello and welcome to episode 98. 98 is generally speaking a good number, but it is not a good number for me this week because I have fallen down with a terrible cold. If you can't hear it in my voice, I am a little froggy, a little nasally, and generally speaking under the weather. So I had a lot of news to go through this week, but I don't want to strain my voice and I don't want to make you suffer through listening to this monstrosity that is my voice right now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to save my voice. I've got a lot of ad updates. I've started experimenting with Amazon ads. I want to share all of that with you, but I'm going to hold that until next week. But to prepare for episode 100, I'm going to pull out an episode from my backlist. So many of you listening probably have not been listening to the show for the entire 2 years that it's been in existence. So I'm going to pull back. I'm going to play one of my most popular episodes of the show, which is How to Write in the 5 Senses. So I've actually gotten a lot of emails from a number of you over the past week, just this week alone, actually, about being blocked and having writer's block and not being able to get the words out onto the page. And so this episode that I'm going to play for you now, I think is episode 5. And it's an episode that I talk about writing in the 5 senses and how you can use that to rejuvenate your writing, energize your writing, and it may be just what many of you need during this really, really cold, if you're in my hemisphere, winter season, where everyone just seems to be sick. I went to Walgreens yesterday and there was like 7 million people in the medicine aisle. It's just that time of year. So one of the interesting things about my early episodes was that I did this narrative format, like I was trying to make it like a NPR style, sound effects in the background, journalistic type style. I've abandoned that mainly because it takes a lot of time to produce and also because I was starting to run out of ideas. But if you haven't heard the early episodes of the show and you like that format, maybe check out the first year. With that, I'm going to take some time to recover. I hope that you all have a great week, and I will be back next week, hopefully with a much better sounding voice. The older I get, the more appreciation I have for the 5 senses. There's something to love about paying attention to all of life's cues in a 5-dimensional way. There's this memory that I'll never forget. I was sitting in my great-grandmother's kitchen as a boy as she cooked lunch on a sunny afternoon. I remember relishing the sweet smell of fresh cornbread when she pulled it out of the oven, collard greens simmering on the stove with a ham hock bobbing on the surface, the ceiling fan whirring wildly, Judge Judy blaring on the TV, people screaming at each other, sugar exploding on my lips as I drink a cold can of grape soda, beads of sweat on the shiny can like translucent pearls. I crush the cold aluminum in my palms. Time for another one. Was that vivid? Did I take you there? Could you see, smell, and hear the memory? If so, keep listening to find out how I did it, because I'm going to talk about one of the key secrets in my writing craft. I'm Michael Laran, and this is the Writer's Journey podcast, where you get a window into the life of a working science fiction and fantasy author. I'm on a mission to go from nobody to bestseller, and I'm documenting every step of the way. Tune in every week as I share my progress and discover what inspires my books and how I write them. You can find the show notes for today's episode at michaellaran.com/podcast. This week, I'm taking you behind the scenes of my writing process. Hello there, and welcome to episode 7. I want to talk today about a technique that I've been using in my writing for the last 10 years that has made a big difference with readers. It's the reason why in reviews, readers say that my work is imaginative, visual, and it's almost like they can see my story unfolding. That technique is using the 5 senses in my work. And when I say use, I mean repeatedly, over and over again. This is fairly common advice, but I wanted to talk today about how I apply it practically. In order to use the five senses effectively in your work, you've got to do it in such a way that it doesn't impede the flow of your story and that readers don't notice you're doing it. When I was writing poetry, one of the first things I learned to do was to use the five senses. Poetry forced me to economize, so I often got creative and used single words to describe something in two senses. Sometimes I made up words to achieve the image I was going for. May I just say that you look razzly-dazzly today? When I made the jump to short stories and novels, this was something I was already pretty good at, so it made the transition smoother. I'm at the point now where I do this on autopilot. I don't even have to think about it. In fact, when I'm in public and called upon to speak, which happens fairly often, I often speak in stories, and I find myself using the five senses orally too. I took several courses with Dean Wesley Smith, a prolific author who I consider to be a virtual mentor, and he talks about how the five senses ground the reader in your story. It makes the story real for them because they can see it and they can feel it. In the clip I opened the show with, I used all five sensory details to tell the story of sitting in my great-grandmother's kitchen. If I did my job right, it was engaging and kept you listening. Here's how I've learned to take writing with the five senses to the next level. And I'm just scratching the surface here. I like to pair the senses with my content. Example number 1. In my last Dragonlord series, my main character is a dragon. A dragon is going to experience sensory details differently than a human, so when writing the book, I focused on taste and smell more often, about 60 or 70% of the time whenever I needed a sensory detail. That made my hero's observations more realistic, and readers called it out in the book reviews. Example number 2. When choosing imagery, I don't just pick the best thought to describe something. I use imagery that matches the emotion of the scene. In a poem, I once described tumbleweed rolling through a building. I used the line, rolls through the bowels of broken buildings. I could have said, insides of broken buildings, or rubble-crusted broken buildings, or some other sensory phrase, but with that poem, I was trying to describe a desolate, post-apocalyptic atmosphere. Bowels has a negative smell connotation and reminds one of ruin and decay, so that image made the most sense. I'm being very basic here, but you get the point. Example number 3. I use sensory detail to help the reader see out of the character's eyes. When the reader is along for the ride with your character, they live alongside the character and they see what the character sees. They also cannot see what the character cannot see, which is sometimes helpful because you can hide certain things in plain sight that will be important later. To illustrate this in real life, I can't tell you how many times I have an encounter with someone and I recall it like it was yesterday, but my wife, who was right there with me, recalls it differently. She focuses on different details than me, picks up clues in people's body behavior that I completely missed. But here's the thing, the clues were still there. If there's anything I've learned, it's to imagine writing as painting. Think about the last painting you saw. Artists have an uncanny way of focusing your eye. Certain elements of a painting have amazing detail. Others have basic detail. The artist is attracting your attention to what he wants you to see. When you're writing, you're drawing with mental paint. You want the reader to see what you want them to see. All else is noise. You can use sensory detail as a way to ground readers in the story, hold and direct their attention, and distract them from something that might be important later on. Very powerful.
Thanks for joining me this week. If you enjoyed this episode, you'll enjoy my backlist episodes at michaelaran.com/podcast. For your free starter library of my favorite novels, join my fan club by visiting michaelaran.com/fanclub. If you're a writer and want to connect with me further, check out my YouTube channel, Author Level Up, for helpful writing advice at authorlevelup.com. Thanks for listening, and I'll be back next week.